Hello, Carlos.
Hello, Jeff.
Carlos Henriquez.
Yes, sir.
Welcome to the Lincoln Review Podcast.
Thank you for having me.
How are you?
I'm doing well today.
Good. Glad to hear it. We are recording in the morning rather than the evening, the usual podcast record time, so I got my iced coffee and raring to go.
Whatever gets you going.
So, should form the audience. I remember I've done, I think, 2 panels with you now for the Urban League. And
now the other one was for Chamber of Commerce. Were they both Urban League?
No, it was both Urban League. Both
Okay.
Urban League.
All right, yeah.
And the reason why I wanted to invite you on is because, surprisingly, we agreed on a bunch of things that I was like,
be surprised.
Wait a minute.
Yeah.
Wait a minute. I mean, but let's keep in mind, the rest of the panel did not agree with
Right,
with
or either of us at times, maybe. But.
Yeah. So I thought Carlos had a very interesting perspective that I wanted to get on here and talk about some of the issues we've discussed in past episodes.
Right. Now you got to give him, but you got to give him why it was surprisingly. When you say surprisingly, you know.
Well, okay, you are a former state rep, but you're a Democrat,
right?
And
lifelong registered Democrat.
And I love having Democrats on this podcast because it's more interesting to me to talk about the differences in a intelligent way, a calm way, rather than the shouting fest.
Twitter fights.
Yeah, Twitter fights you see on TV, so we can go a little bit deeper and unpack this stuff.
Absolutely.
But I don't even remember what we agreed on. I just remember the fact that we did agree on.
Happened often when I was in the house. I had a lot of GOP friends, especially in our freshman class. It was 20 and 20. I think 41 came in our freshman class. Mm-hmm. So you learned that there was more that we had in common than divided us. We weren't going to just fall into rank and file of what everybody else. I mean, after a couple of years, people started falling into rank and file. But at least we came in with an ideal that we would have this open dialogue.
What's talk to me. I'll kick it off to you. I have a lot of questions.
Okay. But
my first question to you is, where do you think? Where do you just off the top of your head? Where do you think we agree? Me being I'm a conservative kind of, your run of the mill Republican.
Yep.
Where do you think? Yeah. Well, but there's so many flavors, and we can get into the flavors too. What do you think? What do you think we do agree on things like that? Because I know there was a fair amount of common ground.
I think it starts with kind of community engagement, civic engagement, right? I think regardless of what party you're in, that machine is the same. You have to talk to neighbors, you have to build on commonalities, you care about your community, you care about people. So I always try to start there, regardless of a party name or affiliation. We're people first, and let's start to build on the commonalities. And I think we were talking about just different ways to engage people, kind of how we see the game get played at higher levels. Like I said, people start to fall into rank and file, but I really think we have an idea of what a healthy community looks like, what people's, like you said, engaging in intelligent conversation, and how that moves us forward as people. I think that's our base commonality, and we can always grow from there.
I agree.
See that you agreeing again?
Yeah. I know. We'll get in. Don't worry, the audience.
We'll split soon.
We'll disagree.
This is the honeymoon part of the podcast.
Absolutely. Okay, so I DM'd you on Twitter because I wanted to get you on. I forget when I started following you, but it was probably after we did one of the panels or something like that. And I had a question for you first, but you had listened to the episode Ed Lyons and I did on gentrification.
Yes.
I wanted to get your thoughts. So let's just dive right in. What did you think about that episode? And for the folks at home, I'll try to include the link for the original episode on the show notes.
I found it interesting. So one, I listened to it, and I had to listen to it with kind of, it sounds funny to hear it, in 2 ears, right? So I'm listening to it as myself, which I have different reactions depending on what's said. So growing up in a neighborhood that has seen disinvestment and white flight and arson for profit and now gentrification, there's a visceral reaction that I have, but then there's also the fact that I want to listen to other perspectives. So it's not just about my sole perspective or my sole experience. I mean, that informs me.
You were open to the new ideas.
I have to be because everybody sees the same situation differently through their own eyes. So I need to be informed of how other people see it. And that was important to listen to through that lens.
You mentioned the word disinvestment. Let's talk about that. Talk about what you think. So along that track, because I remember after we did after one of the Urban League forums.
Yep.
a woman came up to me and she was talking about how there needs to be more investment and talking about legit financial investment, not like tax dollars or something like that. It was straight.
Yeah, not tax credits, but actual
cold
hard cash.
Cold hard cash into the community. And she had a paper and a little note that she wrote me. I actually read it, and it brought to light a lot of things. And we can get into the politics of it, of like the red lines from years ago and those things.
Which is huge.
But back to what you said. So the disinvestment. Talk about that, how that happened maybe over the years, or what's going on right now.
So I'm 41 years old. I moved into the neighborhood that I live in now when I was 4. Okay. So seeing it as a child and growing up, and you kind of learn it. You learn the history again as you get older. You see it through different perspectives. But I grew up in the Dudley Triangle between Dudley and Blue Hill Avenue, which had formerly been a large Jewish and white Irish community, probably in the 50s and 60s before the migration started to happen throughout the country. So the community started to change as more African Americans moved in from the South. People were moving out. They were either selling their homes, finding other homes and leaving those homes and becoming absentee landlords. Some were abandoning their homes. Some were paying people to burn these houses down so that they could collect insurance money. And as an 8-9-year-old, this was our nightly thing of what house was burning down. And you saw people leaving the neighborhood. With that, stores are closing, and you see this change going on. So you actively saw what disinvestment looked like as residents were pulling out. You see crime, or you see an abandoned house take its place, and rather than a family being there, now you have a vacant house. Now you have squatters. The crack epidemic soon came.
It's a spiraling cycle.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
So you have less corner stores, less businesses, less fruit markets. If you don't have the density, if you don't grow the density at the same time you're growing the support services, you create an imbalance.
What we see now, I would think, definitely. I mean, I'm 41 too, so you're growing up in that situation where it's on the decline.
Right.
I'd say maybe a decade or two ago it probably plateaued, and maybe now we're on the upswing, and we're talking about in what I consider good problems to have, gentrification. I mean, if we're fighting over, I don't want, by the way, we're recording this at a Starbucks, but if you're fighting over, I don't want a Starbucks in my neighborhood, you're fighting over the right kinds of problems. So where do you, I mean, you're seeing...
In some ways, I agree with that in some ways.
You're seeing investment go back into the communities that were disinvested in originally because, one, it's prime real estate. It's located to nearby downtown, nearby... the T, nearby good bus lines, all that good stuff. Yep. So the infrastructure's there for it to grow. Right. But then there is a and I wanted to get other folks on the podcast, but you're kind of the first to talk about this locally. But now you're seeing a pushback of saying, well, no, hang on. We want that, but it's got to fit into this box, and it's got to fit into the box that says, well, you got to be black. You can't be this. You can't be this kind of person, this demographic to buy or start investing. And I see that and I go, well, wait a second here. What's the better outcome? So I mean, I'm not being intentionally provocative.
No, I get. No, I like it. It's a take, and I think that you see those kind of things in any neighborhood. I think neighborhoods become a collection of families. You can kind of get a clan mentality or kind of a village mentality. So now, if you're arguing over a Starbucks, the issue is who are you displacing when you invest in the community, right?
Exactly. Yeah,
so, does your Starbucks then replace the mom and pop's coffee shop, regardless of what community you're in? Whether you're in a nice Italian working class community, a nice white Irish community in South Boston, who are you replacing when you bring the Starbucks?
The honest answer is, yeah, you're probably replacing them.
So the challenge is that mom and pops lived in that neighborhood for 10 and 20 years. They looked after their neighbors. People knew them. Right. And you don't get that. So you lose a little bit of fiber of what people consider. People of a certain age consider what community is. So, yes, it's investment, but it's who makes money from that investment, who'd you lose before that investment, and who gets to capitalize from the investment that's here now.
So paint for me your dream scenario of non-gentrification, lots of investment,
my dream
great neighborhood growth or neighborhood improvement. I mean, paint for me what that looks like, and not even just but why it looks.
So without going too deep into the weeds, I think the main thing that I think hinders investment. Two things that hinder investment. financial literacy and access to finances. So we talked a little bit
agree
about
with
the
the
redlining,
access. Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So I would love if people from the community, and this is any community, any working class community in the city of Boston and beyond, could access financial capital so that they could start their own business that's needed in the community that they live or work or serve in.
Agreed.
So that communities are self-sustainable. That's what I'd like to see. I mean,
Okay.
I like to be, people to be able to work closer to
So
home.
somebody in the
live closer to
neighborhood
home.
takes out the loan, starts the business, or
Hires from that neighborhood.
buys the property.
Yeah.
Okay.
Or groups
what
of
else?
people.
What else?
So, I think, that starts to build. So as you start to do that around housing, if you're creating pathways to economic self-sustainability, so not everybody's going to be in the situation where they can get a loan from a bank for a business or a home. But if we can start to, when I go back to the financial literacy, if there are groups of people who can form co-ops and together form opportunities so that they at least are building growth or owning equity in houses and homes and businesses, I think that starts to create some self-sustainability.
Is that not going on though at all?
It's going on. I think it's very small pockets and for very small groups of people. I think when you look at the density of these communities, we definitely need more pathways. And if you think about how long kind of the spigot's been shut off in terms of redlining and at different levels, it's a lot to come back from.
For the audience who might not know, redlining is a practice that banks used to engage in where they essentially drew a red line,
right,
theoretical and literal, around a neighborhood,
yep,
where they would not loan capital into those neighborhoods. So it's turned into a verb called redlining, and usually it was poor minority neighborhoods.
Right, it is how ghettos were made.
That were redlined, and people, and it talk about divestment. So, okay, if that's happening on a small scale, why isn't it happening on a bigger scale? You're talking about local reinvestment where
right. I think
financial literacy.
Yep.
Is one half of it.
Yep.
Let's make the assumption that the people that would want to do this or assist those wanting to do it are probably more financially literate. I'm going to make that a assumption, meaning that somebody, if they wanted to take out the loan or start the business,
they're a little bit further ahead of somebody that hasn't even got the thought yet that I should be doing this. Yep, I'm with you on that. I'm going
to make that assumption.
Okay, I'm with you.
But the second part is the capital part, the investment. I see, whether it's Brooklyn in New York City, whether it's Dorchester, Mattapan, Roxbury here in Boston, whether it's any city across the U.S. where you're seeing this kind of resurgence of those neighborhoods, I think we're probably at a point where banks or investors are probably looking more to those neighborhoods than they did before. Not right. They're
glancing over there. They're glancing now. Yep.
But they're taking a good hard look at that. So I don't think that's much more of an issue. So I guess my question is this: does it really matter who receives that investment and invests it back in that community if they're doing something? Because does it have to be somebody from that neighborhood? Because I think this is what it comes down to.
It doesn't. I don't think it has to be, but there's some parts to it. So, it's not just the person; it's what that person believes in terms of their sense of community. I can open up a business in your community that supports your community. Let's say you need a pharmacy, and I open up a pharmacy. That's great for all the residents of the pharmacy. But let's say I don't hire any of the clerks or cashiers from that neighborhood.
Right.
I had a chance to grow the economy in that local neighborhood even more by hiring locally. And I might miss that because I don't understand that as a business owner or believe in it. So there's levels to it where you can increase how much you're helping that community. The other part of it is it's great that banks and finance might be glancing now because it's more profitable for them.
Right.
I mean, it's always been profitable, but it's more profitable and it's kind of an easier time. The difference is now the community has missed out on. So you'll give me $500,000 to buy, you'll give me a loan for $500,000 to buy a home that if you weren't redlining me 20 years ago, I could have probably gotten that same house for $100,000 or $200,000.
Right.
So, we're talking about money that only exists in a computer right now, but that's still $300,000 to $400,000 of moving money that could have been captured and seized by a community and put into that community or family or families.
We can definitely relitigate the past as far as that, but
with money, we know it matters. We know that money, that wealth continues to build, so it's not something where you get in.
But I think there's a difference when you talk about something like the redlining, which is in large part a bad practice, but for whatever the factors that contributed to it, there wasn't profit to be made, and I don't. I know
Well,
a fair
I wouldn't
amount
say,
about.
I wouldn't say
know
there were no profits to
well,
be made. It was the
there's
decision
mo-
whether you wanted to make your profits there or whether you wanted to make them somewhere else.
riskier. It was riskier.
For all loaning is riskier, but yeah.
For a multitude of factors, meaning that if you're going to, regardless of the demographic of it, but the socioeconomic makeup of a neighborhood, if it's poorer and you're loaning money to folks where there's not a lot of jobs, high unemployment, and that is just going to be a riskier investment. So people are on
a very basic level, but there are even in those neighborhoods there are businesses that survive and thrive for decades on decades.
Sure. And I would, but the thing is, I guess my point on there is that I have yet to meet an investor or a banker who doesn't want to make money.
Right.
And, that trumps all of it. That trumps all
Usually,
of it.
I would say,
and this is the thing. There's an incredible opportunity to make a lot of money in the neighborhoods where there is gentrification taking place.
I think I would disagree that it trumps all. I would say in most cases it trumps all. I think belief systems sometimes trump even people's desire to make money. People will decide, I don't want to make money with that person. I don't want to live next to that person. I don't want to do business with that person. People make those decisions all the time.
That's
it's not wise financially, but they make it.
I won't say trumps all. Then maybe I'll qualify it, and I'll say what you're talking about is the exception, not the rule. For me, from where I'm sitting, I'm saying if there's if somebody sees an opportunity to make money, and it's the way they've always made money, making a loan, getting it paid back, they're probably going to do that. Now they may not do that, and we can get into, maybe that's where race comes into it.
I think so.
And where the redlining took place years ago.
Yeah.
But we fast forward to now, how does that play into it?
Well, I don't think redlining has stopped. I mean, I think you probably see more investment in areas where you haven't before, especially with rising house prices. With you see the Boston real estate market going up. But I don't think it's completely stopped. I mean, if you can go from Roxbury to Mattapan and there's not a sit-down restaurant where they'll pull out a white tablecloth and with a full liquor license. Now, I don't think that's an issue of I wouldn't say that's just race, and I wouldn't say it's just economics. Of course, you need a good operator, you need a good location. Those things those stars have to align. But spending my life in these neighborhoods and not being able to go to dinner, if the same density, 20 of them can survive on one block in the North End or in East Boston, then surely 2 or 3 of them can survive in Roxbury, Dorchester, Mattapan, where these neighborhoods are just as dense. The income levels are similar or can be similar.
So let me ask you a question. An entrepreneur comes in, and this I think is a real example, and a real recent example. You have an opportunity, say there's space available in one of the neighborhoods you're talking about, to open a restaurant, a nice restaurant. I don't know whether it's sushi or fusion or whatever. But the owner of the restaurant doesn't look like the rest of the neighborhood,
right?
And maybe the neighborhood activists go, no. Thank you, but no.
Right. Those are my least favorite activists. Anybody that plays the NIMBY. So
because that I think, and we've actually, there were some examples when we talked at the Urban League where I think we didn't really get into it there, but the examples of and I've heard there's no gentrification.
Right.
And I'm going like, whoa, guys, like,
and that's
hang on a second.
I think that's a mix. It's a mix. You miss an opportunity there, right? So again, I go back to the most important thing is having a good member of your community. So if you want to open that business up, are you going to be a good community member? Are you going to clean the sidewalk in front of your business? Are you going to hire locally? Are you going to donate to the Pop Warner and Little Leagues in the neighborhood? Are you going to run a legitimate business? I think that's number one. I do think people have their human side says, well, I've been in this community for 20 years and we can never get a business off the ground. I feel jealous that this person can move in. They have the equity for whatever reason. Maybe, But that's more of a jealousy. You have to get past that if you're going to do good business for your community.
Yeah, but this is the trade-off, right? So I think this gets down to kind of the crux of it. The fundamental trade-off we have as people who are living together in what we want to call a community. Right? So you have a person that wants to open up a restaurant, a store, whatever, in a neighborhood where they don't look like the rest of the people.
Right.
Okay? You have a group of activists saying, no, thank you. We're set. We're good. Yeah. And then the restaurant, or then the space sits vacant for another year or two until.
I think that's problematic.
So the trade-off is You get somebody who wants to start a legitimate business, do good for the community, make a profit.
Yep.
But your earlier example, maybe they displace somebody else. I guess the question, what it comes down to, is this idea of community. Okay? So you have communities and neighborhoods where lots of folks look like everybody else on the block.
Yep.
And where I live out in the suburbs, I moved out from the city years ago when I was getting married. And, you know, I hate this phrase. Oh, God. But as a white guy.
Yeah. That's not a terrible phrase. I've heard worse phrases than that.
I hate it. You see it on Twitter. You see it everywhere. And they qualify their comment. They go, as a white guy.
Right.
And I feel
like it's too politically correct that you're on eggshells?
No, it's just like, just say your thought.
Right.
Who you are, your category that you fit into, that you qualified before you saying your thought, is meaningless, essentially. Just say your thought. Say your thought.
So go ahead.
It shouldn't be personal.
Now that you qualified it.
But now that I qualified it, my neighborhood or the town I live in and all that stuff, it's just sort of there.
Yeah.
It's not the white community. It's not the fill in the blank community. It's not, it's just like, okay, they want to do construction over here.
Yeah.
Do we like that? No.
Does it work?
Does it work? You know, it's
traffic.
more.
Right.
Oh, that's gonna be a pain in the.
Yeah.
Oh, what, you're gonna put another Dunkin' Donuts there? You know, it's that kind of thing. It's very utilitarian in that perspective. It's like, what does this do? Does it hurt me? How does it affect me?
Right. And I get that. I think there's, but there's a reason why there's a difference, though.
Right. There's a lens there. But what I guess what my point is, whether I have neighbors who are people of color or I have neighbors who are white, it's still the same argument. And I think it gets touchy and tricky when we talk about neighborhoods that are largely one skin color, as opposed to just looking at so what I'm saying is the idea of community is that, well, we all look the same, or we just live in a certain area and we like the area because it's got nice parks, or it's close to downtown, or
close to commuter rail, or something like
whatever
that.
the reason is. That sense of community, or is it more kind of like the tribalism thing?
And that's why I think you could define the difference, right? You could define it by geography. You could define it as a collection of families, you know, and that's how typically a village would grow, right? It would be a collection of families just growing out. So there was really a collection there, because, you know, just because you had the same amount of melanin in your skin as somebody does not necessarily make you a community or family. Your enemy could look just like you and be across the street, right? So I really think each community has to kind of define it. But I do think that communities that are largely of color, especially in inner cities that have been redlined, that have been created as ghettos, not only is the race issue there, but there are also other, I hate to overuse this word, traumas that come with it. So it's not as simple as like, does that work? Like I said, it goes back to the emotion. It's hard for people to disassociate from when they've seen family members have to move that have been there for 20 years, or my aunt can't afford to live here after 40 years because the prices have gone up, or this business couldn't survive and now I see this person coming in and thriving. I feel a way about it.
An observation I've seen, and it's interesting that you started out the podcast with describing when you moved here when you were 4, and what the flux the neighborhood was going through at that time, with maybe, you know, arson and violence for sure, but what the undercurrent of that is fear.
Right, there's always a feeling. And now
I
had a different feeling.
I'm here.
You're moving me.
Somebody else is coming in.
Right. Where am I going?
What's going to happen to me?
So
I'm afraid. You know, they say I'm afraid, and I'm seeing.
Well, they don't say it; they just act on it, right? So you come to a community meeting, and because you're afraid, if I let 3 more of these businesses come in, does my son or daughter are they going to be able to afford a house in this community?
Right.
And I've always been a dream of mine. Or do I have to move in 5 years before my kids go to college? And where am I going to move to? I don't even know where I can afford it. And so those fears creep in and don't get spoken to out loud. It just becomes combative when you're at a community meeting. It's about zoning. No, I don't want this. You know, but it even plays in the community without somebody coming from outside. Just different. I've seen it in a Roxbury community meeting where some neighbors are just happy about the power, and they've never had a chance to go, not in my backyard.
I see that. I want to get into that in a second.
Now they're the chair of this board, and they're going, you know, not in my backyard. We don't want it. And they're going, well, this puts more eyes on the street. It's not, there's off-street parking. What don't you like about it? We just don't like it. and it'll
Right.
get shut down. So, I think that people should have the opportunity to move into communities. They should have the opportunity to open businesses, and people should vote with their dollars more than just trying to shut something down before it comes in.
But along those lines, I had a thought on this. So I do see parallels between the undercurrent of fear going now of people who want to fight gentrification of their neighborhood. I see it being a lot very fear-based,
right?
Because of what we just discussed.
Yeah.
So maybe and I'm not coming at this from some naive perspective that there's not racism and there's not a good amount of racism in in our country, in our city, in our world. Like, I'm not dismissing that. But what I'm saying is, at what point do we start taking into account what's the better outcome? Meaning, I don't know, your personal situation is your personal situation. When I know I got married, I lived in the city because I was in my 20s and early 30s and liked living in the city and working in the city and, going out on the weekends and having fun, doing everything you do as a young person living in a major metropolitan area.
And then she said, Jeff, we're not going to live in the city. I'm not raising these children in the city.
Exactly. So you move out. You move out to the suburbs where it's like, my wife was like, I want a backyard. Yeah. I'm like, okay, when you get married, people who are single, you'll understand. You just do what your wife says.
How do they say? Happy wife, happy life?
Yeah. So, but in that situation, I've gotten I'm getting older, I'm getting more tired. I like the suburbs, right?
It's quiet.
You don't
have to argue with neighbors a little further away.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
And regardless of the racial makeup of the friends who I have who have moved to the suburbs, they're like, or even people you talk to, they're like, I'm getting out of this neighborhood. And the people who might be successful, like, some choose to come back and stay in the neighborhood and build and do whatever they build it back up or just live their life. Yeah. And some people are like, I'm out. I am out.
I think it's very individual.
So I guess the when I'm trying to circle it back to community and then we'll move on. I think the idea to me is that there can be urban communities, suburban communities, rural communities. Yeah. And on the individual idea, depending on what you value, it doesn't matter where exactly you live in terms of geography, but if you're living around people who want the same things as you, that probably trumps it. And what I think might be the fear, or what I'm observing, is that maybe, lack of a better term, a breakup of the black community could happen with gentrification. Definitely. But is that bad? Is that good? Because if the individuals in that community move on to better lives where they're more satisfied with wherever they're living, and the outcomes are better, and we get away from that, this is.
But you
maybe,
have to get. You can't. So yes, that's a very idealistic viewpoint
it is.
of it,
and I'm not denying that at all.
But the pathway to get there, right? So, and I'll try to do like a quick history. So think about black families, the traditional African American families, right? You describe communities; those communities were based on geography, right? Urban, suburban, rural. Right. If we're keeping them in their textbook, their dictionary form, most of the people that are in communities, if you think about the Great Migration of the 50s and 60s, of black people moving from the South, moved into these communities and were met with fear.
Certainly.
Right. So my grandparents. Their parents were met with fear, and they watched this investment based on the color of their skin. They moved into a community looking for the same things that people were looking for, nice neighbors, a fenced yard, and people were like, nope, we're gonna move. So then I'll use the word corral, not trying to be provocative, but you're redlined into a community, and you form a sense of community again. Even within that, as people become upwardly mobile, your lawyers, your doctors. So then crime comes with it because it attaches itself to poverty, whether you're of color or not. Whether you have less melanin in your skin. Usually, if you're starving to eat and have certain basics, you're going to do certain things that come with it. Not always good things. So you lose some of your lawyers, your doctors, your upwardly mobile people of color are now moving out of the neighborhood. The neighborhood shrinks down to now it's even poorer. Right. And it's less diverse.
All right. Well, what does that tell you?
But what I'm saying is now the people that you have left, when they see gentrification, it's not like they have the option to move out. They're being pushed. It's not like someone's coming in and saying, if I'm a renter, and I've been here for 30 years, you didn't come in and say, well, this neighbor's going to get nicer when you come in. You go, no, I might end up in Brockton. I've never lived in that community.
That's a very valid point.
So these emotions come with it. And they come with it for generations.
Right.
And it's so, I've I've lived it now through one generation. I've heard it from my parents. That's two. It compiles, and people don't just let it go when you've been moved out of something where you put 20 or 30 years.
Yeah.
I mean, I made my political start as an organizer, watching people dump and burn stuff in my neighborhood and calling and organizing as a kid. So the idea that I can't afford to buy a home in the neighborhood I spent 40 years in now, because they're $500,000 up, it frustrates me. I can squash that at a community meeting, but I don't expect everybody to. So
I'm going to pivot in a second, but I think this has been good so far. This is kind of what I wanted to unpack and get your perspective on. And I think if I can leave the audience with this and your audience with this, because we're going to swap cast this, if I can leave them with one thing, it would be that it's trade-offs. So you have to measure the trade-offs.
Right.
You can't have, and I'm just going to flat out say,
and the trade-offs are different for everybody.
Right. You can't have a universe where you say, well, we want investment in the community, but we want it exactly the way we want it, and set up, people who are going to invest, they're going to invest.
Right.
Or you're going to keep them out, and they're only going to come knocking so many times before they go, all right, we're out. Sorry.
I mean, and ideally, I think the self-sustainable idea though is in terms of a tight-knit community. I think the more people you have from that community working for the betterment of that community, because you're going to get people that, we could really, I know we don't want to spend more time on it. We could really unpack and get into, people will talk about Wall Street, the Black Wall Street, and people talk about towns and cities that were black and black-owned and self-sustainable, and how whether integration is a good thing or was it a bad thing.
This is a good pivot, but I'll just say that lastly that I think the self-sustaining thing, but I think it needs to be more of a mix, a diverse mix. But true diversity. Then.
Well, see, now in the Dudley Triangle where I grew up, I was the chair and member of the Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative Board, and we recognized early that our neighborhood had a lot of diversity. We had a large group of African Americans, Latinos, white residents that stayed, and Cape Verdeans that were large in the community, and we created a civic board that actually had seats. Said it was 4 seats for each large ethnic group. So that we recognize the diversity, maintain the diversity on a voting board that looked at all of our zoning, looked at all of our community things, so no one ever felt like one ethnicity was dominating. You kind of have a competition, like there would be 6 candidates running for the white seat, 8 candidates running for the black seat, and it seemed contentious. You would be like, wow, this right?
I don't know. That seems that
30 years. Come check us out. Dudley Street Neighborhood
I may
Initiative.
have to.
30 years it's been successful.
But anybody when we do segregation based on what people look like, I get a little antsy with that.
It should make people antsy, but antsy doesn't mean it's bad if we have a long history with it.
All right.
We reach a consensus and everybody feel good about it.
So I think this is a good pivot. There was a few months ago an article in the Boston, a series in the Boston Globe on racism.
Yeah.
Okay. I look at his face.
It wasn't a great series.
It wasn't a great series.
It was like, hey, we're going to use our paper to say there's racism.
Nobody locally has done an evaluation of that series until right now.
No, someone has.
Did I miss it?
I think Chris Ferrone has touched on it at the dig.
He did. Well, actually, Chris was tweeting at me today, and he's been on here before.
Well, that's good.
Actually, we should get him. If he did, I read some of the articles that he did. I didn't know if it was a full.
How much ink he's put to it.
I do know there was some time dedicated to it, but there was a section. I think it was on. I forget which section. I actually took notes on each section, and because it was really interesting to me what they were doing and what they were not doing in that series, and they had an article about the neighborhoods across the country, especially around Atlanta, where they were nice suburban towns outside of major metropolitan areas that were largely African American. Right. So that was a section of it, and that's kind of what we were just talking about. But
long-time access to wealth. Long-time access to wealth for black residents in Atlanta.
Absolutely.
Longer than in Boston, Massachusetts.
Right. So you can, that you can learn from that. But what did you think? Where did the Globe fail on their racism piece? I have ideas of where they failed, but I want to hear your thoughts first.
Let me put my bias out there. It's always tough, growing up and understanding racism from my experience. It's always tough when a large newspaper run predominantly by white men are saying, "Oh, by the way,
white liberal men."
Right. Well, I use that term very loosely. Liberal. I mean, a lot of people fly under that flag, but what if you ask them to say what it means, I don't think they could. So for him to let's say the editor to come out and say, hey, by the way, we're gonna use the front page to let you know there's racism in Boston. Like it's not cutting edge news to me. I think I'm not sure what their goal was besides saying that it exists and how problematic is it.
I'll tell you what their goal was. It was clear. Their goal was to shut everybody up about the issue itself and go, hey, look, we did a series on racism. We're going to win a Pulitzer Prize on it. And
that's what I thought the more of the mission was about. Hey, look at us. We're doing something that we think no one else is doing, but you haven't said anything that we haven't heard.
Exactly. It no new ground was broken in that series.
Their 68 block series about Bowden Street was better than this series on racism.
So where did they fail? If you can remember, I mean, it was a few months ago, so I'm even having a tough time remembering everything.
I think the struggle, especially talking about racism, I think where the failure comes in communicating is one that it's very individual. It starts off very individual and comes from belief systems, right? So that's what I believe anyway, that everybody has their own belief system. It's not just it's not just like a blanket that racism just falls on you. You have to choose to accept parts of it. You're conditioned for parts of it. But they also don't tap into how it really folds into the structure and how, what the real impacts of it are. I mean, I think they touch on it, they do it anecdotally. But I don't feel like it moved the conversation forward. I don't feel like it challenged the powers that be that include themselves, this big media. We looked at them and think about how they write about Roxbury. The same neighborhoods where they're saying suffer from racism are the same neighborhoods they only tell negative stories about, or I would say 90% of the stories. That's true. So it seems disingenuous to even hear that from them.
But one of the glaring omissions from this was crime.
Right, which they report on all the
time. They report on it, but they didn't cover it in that series.
Right.
And I'd be hard pressed to you point me to the paragraph, maybe 2 paragraphs if they did at all.
They even run a Facebook page now. They keep an online discussion going around it.
It was surface level stuff that I thought was just
that we've heard a million times. That academics spit out every 2 years when they get a new grant for $50,000.
And I think. I forget if Ed, who used to be on the podcast with me, he said this, but it made sense. It's like the way they talked about racism, it didn't advance the conversation. No. And more to the point, it was like, if you're a white person, like there's nothing in this that you're just going to go, okay. Right. You're just going to shrug your shoulders.
Are you newly informed about something?
Right.
Is there a human piece that showed how it impacted somebody? Did it show somebody how they got past racism? It didn't have any human, didn't do anything for me.
About on the crime thing, there are some very valid points that exist that have been reported on by good reporters. One who I can think of right now, David Bernstein, who works for WGBA.
Like David, yeah.
Yep. So he tweets about this, talking about the unsolved murder rate in the city.
Right.
The lack of arrest rate for shootings.
Yeah.
All those things. That was nowhere to be found. In the Globe series. And I think it's when you get down to, we can talk about gentrification, which we did. We can talk about the racism that people have experienced both personally and professionally and all of those things. But one of the major things, neighborhoods have to be safe. And if you're not talking, so we can talk about. Actually, this is what I kind of want to get into. Some of the things where we've agreed on, you and I in the past, is the idea of what I think the core values and family values that influence people's lives for more positive outcomes, being the family unit being intact, keep it, not disintegrating families, and how that influences the education people achieve.
Yeah.
what they go on to do professionally,
right?
The lives they because there's a very.
So I want to qualify this, but I think we should go down this road, but it's similar to what we talked about in terms of redlining. If you let me in, if the bank lets me in now, where I can buy at $500,000, that's different than letting me in when it was $20,000, right? So, when that home was $20,000. So even when we talk about these families, I'm always get frustrated when I read coverage of this, especially around crime. So I've been a victim of it. I've lost friends to it. I've seen people that I grew up with become incarcerated because they were perpetrators of it. So I've seen the kind of the gamut, right?
Yep.
And I see how the family dynamic plays. I was raised in a 2-parent household. I have friends who raised in a 2-parent household who are doing pretty well. And I've had friends that were raised by single parents who are doing very well. And then some who, it can go any which way, right? I mean, 2 parents doesn't necessarily guarantee you.
No, it doesn't guarantee. It's the statistics kind of
studies
bear it
show,
out.
right, that we know that it gives you a better shot.
Yeah.
So, but when we start to trace things back that are systemic racism based, like redlining, you could really trace it back to slavery. That is the beginning of disintegrating families. When you have to migrate, when you're stuck in poverty for 17 generations, these things affect your family, your bloodline forever, right? So whenever you're able to buy into the American dream and gain wealth, that changes what you're able to do with your family. You can't go home and teach family values if you're worried about the lights being on tomorrow, right? You're going to stay out as late as it needs. If your wife doesn't have enough food to cook tomorrow for breakfast, you're not home worried about family values. You're out. Or same thing for finding housing. Same thing, before you can get your kid to do homework, you have to make sure there's a roof over their head.
Right.
So these things start to disintegrate in the background, and that's what the globe does not talk about, or people don't talk about. And that's what he really erodes. So then you have a mother or 2 parents that are working 2 jobs until 10 o'clock at night. Good parents. You have an 11-year-old and a 13-year-old that you leave home from 3 p.m. to 10 p.m.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter how good intentioned you are. When they come outside into a neighborhood, there's going to be other influences. When they're alone, even if they're alone, now the TV's raising them, right? We're raised by baby boomers. We were raised on the TV.
Yep.
Now your kids are raised on the tablet and the phone. Like, it's the less time you have, the less time you make changes that family dynamic. And that puts a lot of pressure. Poverty puts an unbelievable amount of pressure on people that non-poor people don't even see.
Those are excellent points. Let's get a bit political, and we can pivot back to this. But what's the just personally? What's the solution or something that moves us in the right direction? Because this is where you get into the tried and true Republican Democrat way, where Democrats will say, "All right, we need a new social government program."
I tend to agree with Republicans. I end up falling in the middle in this argument, right? So I don't think that money alone fixes it. Money does not create values. It alone does not change belief systems. It does not make the world just a happy place. It can send you all around the world to see some of those happy places. I do have to believe that there's a balance between the government being a safety net or making sure that there aren't barriers to equity, but then there's also a responsibility of people, regardless of whether it's family members, community, city, to help create self-sustainability, right? I don't want you to fish for me every day, but if you know how to fish, then damn it, show me how to get this worm on the hook,
right?
And I will be good on my own. But if you are keeping all the worms over there, or the worms cost $10,000, you can't just tell me to hey, go fishing, and you'll be fine. So I just want to be able to get us through those. How do we start to give everybody the tools to work towards self-sustainability?
Yeah.
Is that schools?
You're right. You're right. Well, I think okay. I didn't even think about it. You just said it. We've got a big problem, and I see that, and this is across America, and this is political, and we've done episodes.
Don't go anti-capitalism on me.
No, never.
You lose your whole base right there.
No, my thing is the schools, right?
Right.
You have 2016. There's a ballot measure in Massachusetts.
The charters,
yeah. Right. So I mean, I've heard these stories before, and I've talked to people who have experienced them firsthand about they put their name in the lottery for the charter school.
Yep.
And
seen the documentary Superman.
Yeah. So they put their name in the charter school, and they've even stopped showing up for the lottery because they don't get picked.
Right.
And they have to send their kids to the public school, which is largely inferior to the charter school that's a mile up the road.
Right. And inferior in every way. The building is not new.
Yeah.
The infrastructure, the water is bad. Well, even, the paint's peeling.
But even sometimes when the building is new. Like, so I think the example that comes to mind is Mattahunt and I want to say Brook.
Yeah.
Brook Elementary. They're very close to each other in terms of distance, but the scores are wildly apart. And I think there's decent infrastructure, meaning the physical building, at both places. But you had a concerted effort and a disinformation campaign by and I'll just say it, by liberals, a lot of white liberals and unions, teachers unions.
So you were yes on 2?
Oh, hell yes.
Okay.
Hell yes.
Okay.
Charlie Baker was 1,000% right on this, and
I was no on 2.
It was to raise the cap.
It was to remove the cap.
So it would have been all right. So okay, I still was yes on it. Yeah. All right,
so I support as a rep. When I was a rep, I supported raising the cap so that you could be more charter schools, so you'd have more choice,
more strategic.
But I didn't want to get rid of the cap completely, where you could open up a charter school on any corner.
Okay.
We hadn't fixed the funding formula yet.
I would say fair point, but if you do it statewide, you could probably implement a cap locally that you could,
right.
do that something. But
if that had come up, I probably would lean to that.
Bureaucratic
in the weeds, right?
Yeah.
And this is why our schools are
no, but the unions, the teachers' unions,
yeah,
made a concerted effort, disinformation campaign about what the measure was about, and they did it to protect themselves,
right? Largely in their members, right?
And their members, and to the detriment of the children and largely urban communities.
I think everybody played that angle. I think everybody played the angle, played their own angle, and the kids always end up losing.
And that pissed me off to no end. It really, really did, because one of the things that we have control over, like you can sort of like, we could talk about philosophical debates about welfare and work and welfare reform and all those things, but they're really kind of not tangible.
Right. They're not the same as education.
It's not the same, but it's not the same as where it's like, okay,
right.
we do this
right.
can happen.
Right.
It was direct
right.
and it was defeated.
Right.
And this is where I see, and I get pissed at Democrats, where they talk about the community, and a lot of Boston city councilors, if you're listening, are
get them, Jeff.
When they
get them, Jeff.
when they say we're going to help our community, and you give them 50 reasons why more charter schools in the neighborhood would do better, and they nod their head and they go and because they kind of know, because they're smart enough to know.
If you've been around it, right?
They vote the opposite,
right?
And I can think of 2, but I'll probably let you name the 2, in my opinion. But that's up to you if you want to.
No,
but you know what I'm saying. So
I hear what you're saying. Yeah.
So those are tangible things where it can directly affect the lives in a positive way of the kids. Right. And here's the problem: every year that goes undone,
you lose another.
The cycle continues.
Absolutely, and the generation repeats. And I think so. One of the old cliches that I always remember. Are you a father?
Yes.
So you'll probably know. I'm not a father yet, but I've been around enough kids that you teach a child to read, and I think the quote goes: once the child is able to read, they become the CEO of their own education, right? As long as you can read.
I've never heard that. I like that.
I don't know if it's Mel King or Mel King took it from someone else, but once you learn to read, then you read to learn. So once you learn to read, no one can really stop you from getting information at that point.
Yep.
Right. So the challenge we see in schools, and anecdotally, people say parents send their best kids to you to educate. They're not like, I'm going to keep my smart one at home, or I'm going to send my smart one over here.
Okay.
So at what point do we look at the management, just really the physical management of our schools? Who's educating the people in the classroom? I mean, I've toured classrooms in the city where there were 2 classrooms going on. It was literally like walking into certain movie scenes where, there's 6 kids paying attention in the front of the class, and then there's 12 kids in the back of the class doing God knows what, doing whatever they want, and the teacher is just ignoring them. So
this is public school?
This is public schools,
yeah.
High schools. So what happens to those 12? Those 12
they fall between the
graduate.
Cracks. Yeah.
Right. Now they might not have had the value of education instilled in them at an early enough age to understand that this is hurting themselves. But it's an adult responsibility. So if I, the state rep, can walk in the class and see it, the parents should be able to have access to walk in the class and see it. The teacher should see it and have a problem. The principal who was walking me into that school, walked me into that classroom, I watched the principal's reaction. And for them, it was like, this is every day. And I was appalled that this is the state. So it's, even when we get out of the weeds of big policy, walk into a classroom and see how bad the classrooms are doing.
But, and why is that allowed to exist? I have my opinion. I'm not going to say yet. But why do you think that's allowed to exist?
I think it's a myriad of issues, but I know at least in the last administration that I grew up under for the majority of my life in the city, right? It's very tough to even get access to a school. I mean, parents can get into a school building and maybe sit in classrooms, but then it goes back to the poverty piece. How many parents have time?
Well, I guess why doesn't it change? Why doesn't the example that you gave? So that what you saw was an anecdote.
So going back to what you said, I do think that there are quote unquote gatekeepers. There are people in the way. So there are elected officials that run on education. I run on education. I've run on education before as a Democrat in the city. I've gone to a public school and gone to private school, understand the value of education. But I also knew all the hurdles. So I would never promise that we're just going to revolutionize education and change it in your classroom. I knew I had to start visiting schools and start to figure out policy by policy where the pressures were. But then you realize that you're caught in between a parent and their child and the teachers union, and then the politicians circling around because they want the teachers union endorsement or they want to placate the parents.
It's complex, but it's unneeded complexity.
Right.
Because here's the bottom line: if you can fire that lousy teacher,
that's all you need to do.
Lousy administrator,
right?
They'll either
then you have accountability. They'll either go or they'll and the culture will change.
They'll either fix what they're doing and go, oh wait, we can't do this anymore, and they'll start to discipline accordingly. They'll start to organize accordingly. But you said it. It's the unions and
feeds them.
It's the unions and the
politicians
that back them up,
right?
That don't allow that to happen.
You go in a circular dance, and in the middle, you're and this is no knock to individual teachers or the profession. Their teachers are great.
No,
one
it's
of the
not.
greatest
No,
professions
it's not
on
the
earth,
teachers.
right.
Let's be
but
very
the system that runs it,
it's the unions.
and usually even the unions, as good as unions are, and I don't want to knock unions, but they have their faults too. I've dealt with plenty of unions who didn't always operate in the best interest of their members. Because, yes, you're there to protect teachers, but the teachers are there for the students, right? I mean, they love their career and they want to get paid, but they have a passion for helping students succeed. So that should be part of the goal. So downtown at BPS, or now it's uptown, they're making this, you could count 6-figure salaries. You would run out of toes and fingers fast.
It's astonishing.
And
how
the
much
same thing in the school buildings for teachers. Those salaries start to rise quickly. But you're not producing students that can go out and earn $100,000.
Nope.
So at that point, the system is broken, and you know that unless you do something, and it's not going to be electing a mayor necessarily. It's not unless you really start to break the system, and that means either adding an influx of people that are active.
Look, understand something. This is, it was a state measure question to a couple years ago, but Boston could easily do that on its own. City council. The city council members and Mayor Walsh could easily change if they wanted to.
But politics, and I'm trying to tell people this, that I've learned, politics does not work on. People think politics works on ideals and good beliefs and the best side of human beings, and it completely doesn't. Right? It works on everything opposite of that. Yeah. It works on self-protection. So. Yeah. It's really a power game, and it's really about numbers and power, and people protect their power at any cost, even if it means the education of your child or the affordability of your house. And I think until people are willing to challenge that publicly, then we'll keep doing the same dance, and it'll be a new generation of Democrats that comes in and says we have the problems, and they'll make it seem like they're fighting with these evil Republicans that they say are evil and trying to destroy something until you see a Republican's child play with a Democrat's child and realize that you probably picked that party because that's the party of your parents. Let's get back to the issue. Let's leave the party out of it and the religion out of it that you got from your parents, and let's just talk about the issue.
I have a strong belief, and this is the truth, that anybody who wanted to run for public office in the city of Boston, if you ran as a Democrat on a Republican message, you'd win easily.
So how many people have told me that since I have no longer been in office. I've had so many people say, "Listen, Republicans like you. If you just run that message as
you would. You'd win hands down. You'd win every debate. You'd get tons of radio. You'd get tons of TV.
But then we're part of that problem. Now we're just about messaging, and we're not back to the issue.
No.
We still got to get back to the issue.
You vote and you implement policy on the message that you want to run on. That's what it is.
Now, only if you could become elected in state rep and then actually change policy and not become a state rep and find out that only the Speaker of the House and a very small group of maybe 10 Democrats actually decide what bills are going to come out and what budget gets controlled. Then you realize, what did I just do that? I just knocked on all those doors this summer so that I could be the JV member of this club that doesn't even allow you to get into varsity until 10 years?
We'll have to save that for another episode.
Okay, I just want to see if you want to dip into the...
Well, no, because this is what it is. I kind of...
Because it gets ugly in that building.
Oh, yeah. Well, but see, this is kind of one of the questions I wanted to ask you. And it dives in. It dived. No, it was more on the lines of, so, we've talked about race, we've talked about communities, we've talked about gentrification, schools, and a lot of good stuff. And when I DM'd you on Twitter, I kind of gave you a sample question. This is more along the lines of those sample questions, because what you just said, and we're talking about house politics and politics on Beacon Hill, does it bug you, or what do you think of me or anybody coming to you or other members of the black community and talking about racism stuff or race or gentrification, meaning that like,
talk to me how
like
solution, like you come
no, that's actually no.
Okay.
What I mean is, because you just alluded to it, right? So, I'd love to have you back on, and we'll talk about what goes on Beacon Hill and why things don't get okay. That's kind of race neutral.
Right, that's more of a power game.
Right.
But
So that's politics.
Right,
but that's politics. But
right.
we could talk about economic policy, war, drugs, all those things, and those are kind of relatively race neutral. I said relatively. I said relatively. But to the point, I notice, especially
we can get into race and see,
especially in Boston. But hang on, especially in Boston, there is a bucket that, and yes, I'm gonna sound cliched here, but the white liberal media, there is a bucket and a category that they put black folks in black communities into when they invite them on to their radio or TV programs and into their newspaper columns. Meaning
they know what they want them to say already.
I know. Hey, look, I know. Next episode, let's talk about swamp on Beacon Hill. And forgive my use of the word swamp, but let's talk about that, or economic policy.
Swampy up there sometimes. You don't have to qualify for me.
But here's the thing. We came on and we talked about gentrification and race and racism and all those things. Does that bother you, or is it like, look, it's part of the game because we can't get to economic policy and minimum wage and more until we get past that. Do you find it genuine?
I don't find.
But do you find it insulting? Or?
I don't find it insulting at all. I think if you have a genuine desire to understand or learn, is one, or just to have the dialogue so that others can understand or learn. I think that's important. I think as long as it doesn't come with, for me, and I'm speaking for me personally, as long as it doesn't come with, I have the solution or I'm just doing this for entertainment, then I think we have to have the dialogue, right? We can't heal what we don't reveal, and some of the stuff we deal with, we don't even understand it ourselves until we get, you and I have just become 41 for the first time, so we have a perspective that we didn't have 5 years ago, 10 years ago. So if we don't continue to have the dialogue, we can't grow from it. So I think we do have to have it. Now I think it's different than a Globe saying, hey, we're doing a panel and we need 2 black people to talk about how hard it's been, and we just want you to come out and do this one panel. There's no follow up.
But that's what I'm talking. But that's kind of what I'm talking about.
That part is patronizing.
That's what I'm talking about. Yeah, and that's the right word, patronizing.
Right. That part is very patronizing. Or when you get a study from Harvard saying, you get your third study and it says, studies show that there's a disparity in life expectancy between residents in Roxbury and residents in Back Bay. It's kind of like, no shit. Like we didn't need a study. You know what? Those of us that have been poor in Roxbury could have used that $500,000 that you spent on that study, and that would have been helpful to get us out of this poverty that you studied, rather than you do a study that you already did before and republish it. You know what I mean? So it's that stuff is really insulting. And for those that are really poor, it's got to be even more insulting, right? Imagine if I happen to read this Globe or read this newspaper and I see that you spent this amount of money on a study and it told me nothing, and don't know what my stomach's growling because I haven't eaten in 2 days. Now I'm really pissed, and I don't want to hear anybody talk about it because you're just faking it. So
so yes and no.
It has to be done for learning if it's going to be. If you're just doing it so you can win an award to say, oh, we did this, then whoop-de-doo.
But I think
we talk about race all the time in Roxbury.
Yeah, but I think it's incredibly patronizing.
Yes.
Because it's the exception, not the rule, where I see the opposite.
Yeah.
Where it's like, let's invite this member of the community who's black to talk about I don't know, whatever fill in the blank policy that's not related to.
The key tell is that especially when you talk about the Globe or liberal media, they usually qualify you and put black in front of your title. So the Globe will never say, the Pope met with white elected officials or white Catholic elected officials.
That's a good point.
But it's always the black elected, the black pastor. It's never the white pastor. It's never the white priest. So it's always qualified right from the beginning when they write about it. But they want to pull a surprise for exposing race. Come on.
Yeah, this leads into 2 questions we'll wrap up with, I think, and these can go a little bit long if we want. You talk about you mentioned it earlier, actually, the power structure of people who have power in the black community, who like it, and because, well, you know, in all honesty, it's a human condition.
Right. People love power.
And they like the attention.
Right.
And they like going on TV,
Right,
like going
right.
on radio,
Yeah.
like getting their name in the paper, all that good stuff that they thrive on. And I think there is a perverse dynamic where maybe at one point in the past, they still have good intentions, but that sort of is overcome by the attention and where the power comes, where you're not going to advocate for the right things that would improve a community.
Absolutely, it becomes more egocentric than community centric,
Right.
and I think that's the struggle in all people, regardless of race or ethnicity or age. It's kind of, you start to see, you see the world through one set of lenses fixed, and everybody else in the world sees you through their own lens. So it changes for everybody else, and I think people. You can become a gatekeeper for the right reasons because you're opening the gate and letting people in, or you could become the bouncer that stands at the door like, no more, you can't come in unless you pay me to slip me the 20 or 40. And that's the kind of you don't want those gatekeepers because they're not building a sense of community. But often those times find themselves in power and at different stratas of power. So it could be your community organizer, it could be your chief of police.
How important is it? And you alluded to it earlier when you said talking about black pastors, putting the label in front of the title. How important is that? Because I'm gonna leave you with it could be a completely fake quote, but I saw it on the internet.
Well, if you say it's gonna be real.
Well, it's from Morgan Freeman. He goes, the way to solve racism is start to ignore it.
And I've seen that. I've actually heard him say that.
Now, you can pick it apart. There's a fair point. Like, come on, and roll your eyes, and I get that. But it seems to me, if I'm going to sit down and get to know you as a person, as an individual with thoughts, feelings, and ideas in your head, and we talk about them, and we do it like this, and I think there's a revolution going on in information and how people consume it, and it starts with little things like this. And there's all kinds of great podcasts out there, but it really is podcasts. But if I get to know you, Carlos, as person, rather than you, Carlos, as let's check this
the black
box.
elected official,
check,
the Democrat,
check, and then I don't have to hear or feel what you think. At what stage do we get away from that? Because here I'll give you an example. Politically, right now in the city of Boston, there's a congressional race going on, primary going on, with Ayanna Pressley, Michael Capuano. I have asked Councilor Pressley to come on here. I'd love to talk to her. Where they are down the line identical.
I've run a race just like this before.
Identical on what they're, whatever Ayanna Pressley comes out with as a policy position, Capuano is, I forgot about that. Me too.
Right.
And I agree. And it just comes out that way.
Yeah.
Back to, maybe the fictitious Morgan Freeman quote. How important is it? Because to me, I'm going to vote for the person. I don't care if they're a atheist, lesbian, black person. If they want to cut taxes and reform spending and strong military, I'm voting for them.
This is the GOP platform he's running down.
I'm going to vote for them.
Right.
I'm not only going to vote for them. I'm going to write them a check.
But do you feel like every member of the GOP thinks like you do?
No, of course not.
Right.
No, of course not. But I would suspect a huge percentage do.
So I agree with you in the sense that as individuals, that's why I went back to earlier, as individuals, it would be nice, you can decide how you engage people, right? So we all have inherent biases that we are conditioned or we grow up with, but if you can remove them by not checking those boxes, by saying, I'm just going to get to know this person as a person first. And then it starts to dissolve those without you even having to say them. So we don't necessarily have to come to the table and say, Jeff, what are your inherent biases? Carlos, what are yours? Let's get them out of the table. If we just engage each other respectfully, hopefully those will start to fall away. But I don't think we do that as in large groups. The mobs don't do that. Groups don't do that. The bigger the group, the more you get that mob mentality, the group dynamic, and that. But
I think that's the point, because I see us going in the wrong direction right now. Largely, maybe it's mostly on Twitter. I don't know.
No, but liberal media. When liberal media says, "Oh, this is a black pastor," it can give a reader the sense that this pastor speaks for black people.
But yes, exactly, and that's my point. That's my point, because it's like I want to know what that person is thinking and what their ideas are, especially if they're running for office, and what their wonderful plans for my life are, rather than what demographic box they fit into. And the Democratic Party is they have doubled down and gone to the bank and gotten another loan to put on the
the
poker
parties.
table.
I would say both parties, but yes,
well,
identity politics works. I mean, it's unfortunate, but it works. I mean, I campaign as Carlos Henriquez, right? I'm a black man. I'm of Panamanian descent. My father was from Panama. I've knocked on doors. I've talked to friends and had friends say their parents, older African Americans, going, "I'm not voting for no Puerto Rican." Okay, that's one, inherent bias, how you feel, and then I can go to another part of the same district, and a very fair-skinned Latino who never meets me might see the name and go, "Oh, Henriquez, I'm definitely voting for Henriquez." There's no other Latino on the ballot. So
I won't deny that it works. I won't deny that.
I'm not even saying that it's right that people use it, but if it
can you say it's
people use it?
People use it. Can you say it's wrong?
I can't. How can I tell another individual what's right or wrong? Is it wrong?
No.
We talk about morals?
Wrong in the terms of a moral compass.
I can't tell you what your moral compass. I can tell you it might not be the most efficient way.
I'm asking Carlos what his moral compass is in terms of when you experience. And you gave a good example of that. Was it right that somebody said, "I'm not voting for that Puerto Rican," and the other neighborhood said, "I am"?
I don't even look at it as right or wrong. To be honest with you,
I could say it's wrong. Come on. Where they said, "What? All right, what are you gonna?"
I look at it as ignorant. It's a very ignorant and uninformed statement that makes me believe that they're not making good political decisions for me or my community.
I think that's wrong.
But okay, but I don't want. But once I start doing right or wrong, then how many times am I going to weigh in on right or wrong when they start doing right or wrong?
Right or wrong meaning even if they said to you running as state rep, if they're ignorant of state and federal, and they just go, I don't know. Are you pro-life or pro-choice?
Yeah.
You don't have to answer that.
I've had people say, "Do you have a home church?" And I go, and if I said I didn't have a home church, they would be like, "I only vote for people who have a home church."
Exactly. Okay.
I've had people say that.
Okay.
To me.
So
what do I say to that as a politician?
I would say, well,
are you wrong? Am I wrong? So if I say yes, I have a home church, or if I say no, and they say, "I'm not voting for you," and I go, "That's wrong. You're supposed to separate church and state," and what does that have to do with?
I would say I can say qualifying the statement, when you experience that people wouldn't vote for you because of your last name or would vote for you because of your last name, I can say here, I think that's wrong. Okay. I think that's wrong.
Okay.
I think they should have said, all right, what are you in favor of? You going to fix the schools? I got potholes in my street. I got, even if they weren't state or federal or local, or they don't even know the dynamic of it.
Right.
But if they were saying, you're going to fix the schools, I got potholes in my street, and
I could say it. I wouldn't say it to them, though.
What's that?
I could say that that's wrong, but I wouldn't say it to them. I just don't believe people's belief system changes by
I'm not talking about necessarily challenging them. I'm talking about because...
Yeah, that's not how we should be evaluating our leadership.
Agreed. Right. And I think if we can come to at least that understanding as two politically very active people.
Right. I'll vote for you if you're purple and like you said, an atheist and you beam from a ship out of the sky if you can guarantee if you're going to run on this platform.
Exactly.
And I'm going to hold you accountable the same way as the guy that lived next door to me that's running on the same platform.
If more people can agree to that, I think you can probably get away from, I think, what is honestly a toxic mindset. I think the identity politics is toxic because there's no bottom to that hole.
There's no bottom
deep.
To that hole. So deep rooted.
It is deep.
I mean, he's coming back to this, and it's until, and I don't know the answer, but until we really have large scale dialogues about race. I mean, this race is a huge undercurrent to all of this. I mean, and I should say, but it plays. It can drag you out into the depths, or it can push you back onto the sand. But it is the current that plays. That, so people. I can understand a woman saying I don't like it. I can understand a woman saying I'm not voting for a black woman saying I'm not voting for a Puerto Rican. I can think to myself, she's come up very close-minded. Maybe she's part of the Great Migration, moved north. Feels like this new immigrant class is pushing her out of opportunities that she and her family have worked for generations. I get it. I've heard that thinking. I've heard some people would attribute that to a Republican line of thinking, but I've heard that same line of thinking between black and brown people, blacks and Latinos, going to my neighborhood my whole life, or different textures of skin, different colorisms of skin. So it's not just germane or mutually exclusive to Republicans. It's not mutually exclusive to white Republicans. It's a belief system that different people hold, whether black, white, old, or young, whether they choose to accept that they are making decisions based on their inherent biases on how they view race.
And I can say with confidence that, and even from a moral perspective, what you're describing, no matter who engages in it, that is going to have negative consequences long term.
So I think it's the worst of us. It's the worst of us.
If we start to, break it down and reverse the tide with conversations like this and
Yeah,
more conversations.
absolutely.
And the way you improve things is not with less speech; it's more speech. So, wow, man, we've gone well over an hour.
Yeah, and this is light. We feel like we could do
yeah.
another one. So we'll have to get this going. I'll have to invite you on mine, and we'll have to record it. I have to get one more camera.
We'll do it. Well, we're going to swap cast this. So let me say,
it'll be fun.
if you like this conversation, you're out there, share it with your friends on social media. Share it on Twitter. Share it on Facebook. The YouTube will be up as well. Email your friends. Get it around. This has been actually, Carlos, thank you very much for coming on. It's been a great conversation.
Yeah, I think we can have. I think the more people see that, obviously, what people would call us would be two different ends of the spectrum. But I think we're probably, we're both in here in our trucker hats, staying hydrated. 41 years old. We probably are members of the parties of our parents.
Not me.
Not you. You switched.
Oh yeah.
Oh. Parents.
When I was 12, I'll give I've told this story.
Indoctrinate your children better. No.
No, my father, being the open-minded liberal that he was, I said, he's like, oh, what do you want for Christmas one year? And I said, oh, I want Rush Limbaugh's The Way Things Ought to Be.
Oh,
the book when I was 12 years old. And I read it. I read it cover to cover.
My.
And it was like, it was all downhill from there.
Okay. But I think the fact that we can come from different places and have these conversations shows that this is what we need to do. Everybody needs to do more of, or can do more of if they choose to.
What's the name of your podcast?
My call is Still Reppin'.
Still Reppin'.
Still Reppin'.
STIL
REPPIN.
Two L's.
Yep.
REPPIN.
Yep.
Still Reppin'. Where do people find Still
You'll
Reppin'?
find it on that website, stillreppin.com.
Okay.
Podcast and blog.
Any podcatchers?
Not yet. No, I haven't branched. I've just been putting them on YouTube and then linking them to that page.
Well, if you want to follow us here at the Lincoln Review, you can do so on iTunes, on Stitcher, on SoundCloud, on Google Play.
Oh, so you're doing
and now on YouTube. So this video, or I'm going to put this as a video on YouTube. It's a great conversation. So please don't forget to share it with your friends. Tweet at us if you like the episode. I'll put our Twitter handles in the show notes.
Cool.
So definitely tweet us at us some questions. And once again, Carlos, thank you very much for coming on the Lincoln Review.
Me. I'm really looking forward to putting on the high waist pants and wading into that swamp with the gold dome on it and talking about that. I'm sure that'll be fun for all listeners.
And I said either you can run as a Democrat with Republican message, and you will win in a landslide.
Representative Dan Winslow used to tell me that all the time.
I like Dan.
I love Dan. Shout out to Dan Winslow, wherever you are on the West Coast.
Yes, sir. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you, buddy.
And we will talk to you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.